child's nose brushed up against the Christmas tree needles as she leaned over to rearrange the tiny nativity figures beneath. She frowned and decided to push the three wise kings further back to give the shepherds more space as they bent forward to gaze at the baby. Leaning back to take in the effect, she smiled. She jumped up and ran to the kitchen. The radio on the table was talking of night raids over London. "When will Daddy be home?" she asked the two women standing by the stove. Her mother swiveled around from the trussed turkey, wiped her hands on the front of her apron, and snapped off the dials. "How should I know, Annie? I've told you, there's the office party. That can go on and on. My guess is you won't see him till morning." "Do you think Daddy will be that way?" "Annie, how would I know? I'm tired of you asking me that. Just say your prayers." "Mommy's right," Nana said, taking a step towards her. "You're best praying to the Blessed Mother, as she's telling you." The child walked back into the dark living room. The blinking tree lights did not comfort her. She wished Uncle Liam were there, but he was miles up the road, saying midnight mass at the boys' orphanage, and wouldn't get back till Christmas dinner. When he came to stay, Daddy didn't shout at her mother and go around slamming doors. She closed her eyes and tried to think of the face of the Blessed Mother as she looked in the pictures that hung on the school walls. Her pale blue eyes looked upwards, she smiled, and her hands were clasped in prayer. She was always looking beyond everything, Annie thought, and she wished she could be wherever that was, except she didn't want to die and be in that heaven, no matter how wonderful it was supposed to be. She ran to the window, climbed up on the cold sill, and carefully drew back one of the thick black air raid curtains that had been hung over all the windows. The pane was running with steam. She cleared it with her palm and looked out into the inky darkness beyond. A few flakes were flying by, and she could barely make out the outline of the oak tree by the road. She wondered where her father was. He might be in the car now, driving from the station up the steep road that led from the valley. She thought of the narrow stone bridge he'd have to cross over, and the brook underneath that doubled back and forth on itself as it made its way through the woods. Just the other evening, after a day of snow, he'd gone out to check its depth and had come back, reporting the road to the valley had been blocked off by town police. Stamping the snow from his galoshes, he shouted, "Annie, let's go sledding!" "It's too cold and late for that," her mother said, but she ran for her snowsuit and boots and dashed out the door to where he stood, her flexible flyer already upended beside him. They trudged across the highway. The wind blew prickly flakes in her eyes and stirred up the surfaces of the pristine snow. Walking to the crest of the hill, her father positioned the sled. Then he lay down on it, and she climbed upon him, throwing her arms around his neck. Snug against his wide, firm back, she felt him push them forward with quick thrusts of his short, powerful arms. Then they were plunging down into a curving flight that went past snow-laden groves of hemlocks and white pines, past drifts that blanketed stone walls and tree stumps, till they flew over the old stone bridge at the base of the hill. Then they stood and silently climbed back the half-mile that bore the marks of their sled. Her fingers, encased in thin mittens, began to sting from the cold. And when she complained, He took off the glove of his left hand and the mitten of her right, and enveloped her hand in the fleshy warmth of his. A dim light startled her now. She pressed her face against the window, seeing the beginnings of wavering car lights from below the crest of the hill. 2 headlights appeared, heading slowly down the road towards her. The car made a full stop, but turned north on the highway. She exhaled. It wasn't her father. And now it was pitch black again, and all she could hear were muffled voices from the kitchen. She climbed off the sill and went over to the tree where she lay down on her side beside the crèche. She could hear the wind picking up outside and rattling the windows in their frames. Closing her eyes, she imagined Mary and Joseph stumbling through the dark, trying to find a place for Jesus to be born. She imagined them struggling up the hill in the snow to find her house. She would give them help, let them stay. But what if they took a wrong turn? Turned down the road to the quarry that was covered with thin ice, where a long time ago a little child had drowned. She must get out of the house and warn them, she decided. But when she ran to the door, she couldn't reach up far enough to unbolt the top lock of the door to the outside. She heard the floorboards creak beside her. Her eyes opened. "Glory be, you've fallen asleep," Nana was saying, stroking her back. "Up now, and I'll take you to bed." She shuffled beside her grandmother up the stairs to the bed in her mother's room. Heavy-headed, she felt Nana's kiss, then fell into a deep sleep. She dreamt that her parents were arguing. Doors were banging, and her father was shouting, "I'm leaving this house right now, and you'll never see me again." She ran after him, catching glimpses of him in the woods ahead, but he was far outdistancing her, and he vanished suddenly, leaving her frightened and not sure how to get home. Hot sunlight awoke her, and she sat upright in her bed. Her mother's bed, across from her, was empty, and she could see her velvet Christmas dress lying on it. She ran to the window and looked down into the driveway. The car was there. He was safe after all. Out in the hall, she could see the door to her father's room was tightly closed. She hurried down the stairs, saw a small pile of presents under the tree, and ran into the kitchen. "Somebody's up and wants to open her presents," her mother said. "We'll wait for Daddy before we open them, won't we?" "God knows when he'll be down," her mother said, twisting her head away. "In the shape he's in, we're not likely to see him for the rest of the day." "I'm not opening one present till Daddy comes down." "Listen to that child," Nana said, lifting her chin. "Enough of this cantankerousness, Annie, or I'll call you Dadina, as I had to all of yesterday." The child shrank down into her chair. "I don't care if I act like my daddy," she thought. "I don't care one bit if I'm just like him." "Eat your cereal now," her grandmother said, putting it before her. "I hate cream of wheat. Why can't I have toast?" Her grandmother glared and folded her arms across her chest. "I don't want to have to speak to you again about what I told you yesterday," she said. "I'd hope our little talk in the pantry would do you some good." The child fell still, remembering Nana's words after she dragged her from the room. "You mustn't talk back to your mother," she'd said, her eyes impaling her. "Your mommy had 2 dead babies before you were born. You must make it up to her for all the sadness she's had." She looked over at her mother now. Quickly downing half of the pasty mess, She pushed the bowl away. "I'm going to see Daddy now." "Leave him be, Annie. Listen to your mother." Nana carried the bowl away. "We'll open the presents later when your uncle gets here. Now hurry upstairs and get ready for church." "I don't care about the stupid presents," the child thought. She got up from her chair. "There'll be more of those dolls and their frilly clothes. What I want is toy trains to play with, the kind Daddy gave me once." Her father had bought a small Lionel set for her 2 Christmases ago, but her mother had made him return them, scolding that trains were not for girls, that he was selfish and had gotten them for himself. She went upstairs to the landing and stared at her father's door. When she pressed her ear against it, she could hear nothing. She tapped, but there was no answer. She turned the knob and peered inside. "Daddy? Daddy, wake up!" There was a groan from the inert figure who was lying with his back turned in the bed under the shadowy eaves. "Not now, Annie. Let me sleep." His words were slow and slurred. "But it's Christmas, Daddy. I want to give you your present." It was a box of 6 Spalding golf balls. She knew that he would be delighted. Her father struggled to lift himself up, moaned, but did not turn in her direction. "Daddy?" He did not answer. She started towards him, but when he turned, she drew in her breath. One of his eyes was swollen and black, and his puffed-out mouth was lopsided and bleeding from one corner. He tried to say something, but grimaced. She could see a large, rusty stain behind him on the pillow. She tore out of the room and fled to the kitchen. "Daddy's hurt!" she screamed. "I told you not to go near him," her mother said. "He was in a bad fight last night, a barroom brawl. On Christmas Eve to boot. Well, he can lie up there and think about what he's done, ruining our Christmas." "But he's bleeding." She began to sob, frightened that he would die. "He'll be all right," her mother said flatly. "He got punched in the mouth, and it will take a few days for the swelling to go down. Let him be, Annie. He needs to sleep it off. Now go upstairs and get dressed. Start brushing your hair and I'll be up to make your braids." She turned and went upstairs. On the landing, she could see his door still open. She tiptoed to beside his bed. "Daddy? Are you all right?" He was making an effort to open both eyes, but the blackened one remained closed. "What happened to you, Daddy?" "Monkey. I was in a fight. A bad one," he whispered, his whiskey breath blowing warm in her face. He swung himself upward, grimaced, and put his hands over one rib as he set his feet down on the floor. She hopped up and nestled against him. She searched out his features, relieved to see his mouth wasn't bleeding. "Who'd you fight with?" He had told her once that when he was a boy, the bigger boys had picked on him because his father was the town drunk. He'd taken boxing lessons, and after that, they'd left him alone. "I went into a bar in Hoboken before the last train left. There were bad people in there. Bundists. People who were saying Hitler was winning. They wanted Hitler to win." He took a deep breath from the effort of speaking, and she suddenly noticed that one of his front teeth was gone. I couldn't stand there and listen to that talk. I told one of them he was all wrong. A big guy. And before you know it, he jumped on me. Began beating around my face, and then a few of his pals came joining in. His breaths were coming in short gasps. But I got a piece of him before it was over. I bit off part of his ear. She sat, riveted by his words. Her father was a hero. He wouldn't let those people say bad things about her country, or let Hitler come over here. Hadn't he taught her how to march in the Memorial Day parades, how to carry the flag tilted upwards so it would never touch the ground? She reached for his hand and held it. Annie? Annie? Annie! It was her mother calling from below. I have to go, Daddy, she whispered. She ran to the top of the stairwell. I'm here, Mommy. I'm getting dressed. She darted to the bathroom, filled a cup with water, came back to him, and put it in his hands. Sleep some more, Daddy. I'll see you after church. She closed his door, ran to the bedroom, and struggled into her dress and patent leather shoes. Grabbing her hairbrush, she stepped into the shaft of sunlight that cast a golden disk around her on the Turkish rug of green and rust-colored patterns. She sat down in it, Indian style, and as she pulled the brush through her hair, she watched the millions of dust particles caught in its dazzling brightness. She now heard her mother's resolute steps coming up the stairs.